This is Scott Spears, and I'd like to welcome you to a new episode of Scott Spears Now. Today, it's truly an episode where we look back at the history of the 20th century and into the 21st century with a woman who has certainly lived it. She's the youngest PhD in the history of the world at age 20. She attended the Nuremberg trials. She heard Hitler speak at a rally in Germany. She met Eleanor Roosevelt. She met Virginia Woolf. She's done it all. She's Dr. Ruth Gruber. And by the way, did I mention she's 101 years old? Can you believe that? 101. Today we're going to talk to this legendary journalist, the idol of many, a woman who was really a pioneer in journalism, photography, and just about anything else that happened in the 20th century. She is the amazing Dr. Ruth Gruber. Here she is. This is Scott Spears, and today we're joined by a woman who without any doubt has led an amazing life. She is an author, subject of a documentary, subject of a motion picture, photographer, journalist, and a woman who has truly lived the 20th century, currently living in the 21st century, still going strong at age 101. I am proud to say that I am joined by Dr. Ruth Gruber. Dr. Gruber, Ruth, so proud to see you today.
Lovely to see you, Scott.
Ruth, I want to get right into this interview because you have such a great, extensive life. Tell me about your childhood. What was it like?
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn, and I thought the whole world was like our life in Brooklyn. Everybody knew everybody else, and what can I tell you? My parents were loving parents. I was one of 5 children, and we thought the whole world was in Brooklyn.
You know, Ruth, I've heard a lot of people talk about Brooklyn, and they always say it's a magical place. Can you kind of tell us why it's so magical?
I think it was because people had all come from Europe into this country, and they were so delighted to be part of America, and they all felt that they had at last come to a country where they could live freely, where they didn't have to worry that tomorrow they might be locked up or sent to Siberia or just destroyed.
I think you're absolutely right about that, Ruth. You know, in that description, you mentioned being Jewish a lot. What did it mean to you to be Jewish at that age?
It meant that you loved people around you, and my grandfather used to come to our house and take me as a little girl to synagogue. And you know, in a synagogue, the women sit upstairs, the men downstairs, but little girls have no sex. So he would sit me beside him, and I would look up at him, and I thought I was looking up at Moses.
That's a great story, Ruth. You know, something very interesting about your life. At age 20, you became the youngest person in the world to obtain a PhD. How did that happen?
I had gotten this fellowship to Germany while I was at Wisconsin for a year getting a master's. And then I got a fellowship to Germany, and I was sent to go home because they explained to me that I had gone to NYU, was a big college, and I went to got my master's in Wisconsin, Madison, big place, that I should go to a smaller place. So they sent me to Cologne, apparently I'm right. And one day, the head of the English department called me into his office, and he said, "We've been looking at you, Ruth. You're the only woman here who speaks English, and we'd like you to work for a PhD." And I shook my head. I said my family would never let me stay longer than this 1 year. And he said, "Well, don't worry. What I want, because you might be 1 year, I want you to write about Virginia Woolf." And I said, "I never heard of her." Virginia Woolf was unknown in America, and she was unknown in Germany. I said, "Who is she?" He said, "She's an English writer, and I like her writing, and I think that you could read it and write about it." I said, "Well, I can try." So I began to read her books, and I was completely enraptured by them. He gave me some of his books, and I could put any of them down. But my favorite was Roman's Own. And I think it taught me that anybody who really wants to write just must do it. And so I read every one of her books that was the beginning of her life. And I felt that maybe I could write too.
And I want to get back to Virginia Woolf here in a second, Ruth, but when you obtained this PhD, how did that make you feel at 20 years old?
It didn't seem any different from being any age. I was just writing, and reading and trying to get as much done as I could, because she was a genius, and her books meant so much to me.
Ruth, when you finally got to meet Virginia Woolf, I can't ask this question of a lot of people, but what was Virginia Woolf like?
But they made a movie of her here, and it wasn't a bit like Virginia Woolf. She was a beautiful woman, and I got to see her in her home. She lay in front of a fireplace. Beautiful woman in a long gray silk gown, a study in gray shoes, gray stockings, gray hair, and a gray silver cigarette holder. And she lit one cigarette after another and talked. And I sat across the table from her, and I thought, something's wrong here. I came to sit at her feet, and now she was lying at my feet. But she was brilliant. She kept looking out as if she were looking into eternity.
Ruth, as a writer, do you consider her the greatest writer of the 20th century?
I can't say that. There were so many great writers, but I would consider her a great writer. Certainly one of the few, for a long time, nobody even heard about her. But in the 70s, when the women in the feminist movement were looking for a great woman writer, they rediscovered Virginia Woolf, And I think we should all be grateful for that.
Would you say she maybe wrote to women better than anybody ever did?
She maybe wrote to women.
Maybe she wrote to women better than anybody ever did.
Well, I think her most fascinating book is Orlando, and in it she shows what it means to be either a woman or a man, because she's part of each of them. And I think Orlando is her best book.
Yeah, she's definitely was a prolific writer. Ruth, I want to get into another part of your life here, because there's not many people left who can say that they heard Adolf Hitler speak at one of his rallies. Tell us how that happened and what it was like.
I learned one day that Hitler was coming to Cologne to give a speech in the Messe Hall. It's a huge outdoor place where 1,000 people could sit. And when you get this fellowship, they put you with the family of your faith. And I was put with the Herz's, a lovely family, Jewish. At dinner, I announced to Papa and Mama Herz that Hitler was speaking across the Rhine in the Messe Hall, and I was going over to hear him speak. And my German Jewish family were horrified. They took more care of me than my own family did. And Papa Herz said, "Ruth, you're a naive young American. You don't know what these Nazis can do. They can kill you. You mustn't do that. You don't want to go across the line and hear this monster speak." Well, they couldn't convince me. I said, "Papa Herz, they won't touch me. I'm going over and I'm going to hear him speak." Well, they couldn't stop me, of course. So I went across the line and I sat where the people sat, so that I looked as if I just belonged there. And I was really, I must confess, I was scared, because there were thousands of people and they were waving a swastika, and they kept marching in and around and yelling, screaming. And I thought, if SS comes near me and hears my heart thump, they're going to either kill me or throw me out. Fortunately, they never came near me. So I sat there and saw these flags waving with the swastika on them.
Ruth, when you heard Hitler speak, what was that like? What kind of power did he have?
When you heard that voice, you knew you would never forget it. It didn't come from his lungs, from his throat. It came from his down. He was a horror, and I felt that horror in him. Every other words were kill Jews, kill America. And I felt that he would kill me if he knew I was Jewish.
Ruth, with all those adjectives you just used to describe him, a horror, those sort of words, in your opinion, why was he able to convince so many people to follow him?
he knew how to make people hate. He knew how to take a whole set of people and make them hate other people. And he would do it with these horrible words, like, kill Jews, kill Americans. And they believed him. And he said, they're out to kill you. He would take, say, a group of farmers and say, he's going to ruin all of your vegetables. Then he would get another group and he would say, they're going to kill everybody in your division. He knew how to make people hate other people.
Yeah, I think that's very well put and very well described. Ruth, through a lot of your career, you certainly have been a journalist. In your opinion, what makes a good journalist?
I think it's that you're looking for truth, that you want to know the truth of everything that you're covering, and you don't let liars get you down, that you have to look for the truth and the meaning of life.
I think you're right. I think that's what all journalists are trying to do. Ruth, one of the great moments in your life, I would imagine, came in 1944, certainly journalistically. You were assigned to a secret mission to bring 1,000 Jewish refugees and wounded Americans from Italy to the United States. What was that like?
Oh, it was a great meeting. People who had managed to survive. The war was raging, the Holocaust was raging, but they had managed to get into Italy. Part of it was already in peace. And the United States, President Roosevelt, decided that we should get some people out finally. So they got into parts of Italy and they were put on board a ship called the Henry Gibbons. And I was suggested, I was chosen to help them get out of Italy and learn what it means to live in America. So we put them aboard the Henry Gibbons, and it was a great experience.
As people were coming on the Henry Gibbons, Ruth, and you were hearing their stories, what is the story that sticks out in your mind the most that you heard?
There were so many horrible stories. It's hard even to talk about some of them. The men said to me, how can we tell you what they did to us? How they stood us naked outdoors in freezing cold until we froze to death. How can we describe that to you, a young American woman? And I said, you have to tell me, because you are the first witnesses coming into America. So they then described what it was like to be a Jew in Hitler's Germany.
Ruth, certainly you were an American at that time, always have been an American, but to also be Jewish, to listen to these stories, how did that impact you at that time?
It made me realize what my grandparents might have gone through if they hadn't decided to come to America and what America meant to us. incredible that some were able to get out in time and not be caught where millions were caught and murdered.
Absolutely. Ruth, an interesting endpoint to that story. In January 1946, the decision to allow those people from those camps, to apply for citizenship came down. I know you lobbied hard for that. When the word came down, what was that like?
Oh, they were told, it was tough because parts of the State Department tried not to let them in. But on Christmas Eve, after many of us, including Eleanor Roosevelt, got together, but President Truman got on the radio and said, we cannot change the quotas, there are rules in America, but we can save some. And he said, there's a group up in Oswego up in New York, and we're going to let them come and become citizens because in order to get a visa and come to America, you had to leave. So we put them all on buses and they were taken to Canada, and the consul, the American consul there, stamped that wonderful stamp that made them able to enter America. And they were all sent back here from the part that was where the water flowed down. And they came back into Oswego. And New Year's Eve, we had the best New Year's Eve I ever spent. And we did dancing and singing and putting on plays. And that's when we gave them the rights to come. And they decided which cities they would go to live in.
It's such a nice ending to that story. Ruth, in 2001, a movie was made, Haven, about this experience. Did you like the movie?
I did. I think they did a pretty good job. CBS did it, and Natasha Richardson played me, and I think she was wonderful. And it was such a tragedy that she should have died trying to learn her skis. But I think they tried their best to tell the story, and I think they succeeded.
I'm glad.
Anne Bancroft was wonderful. She played my mother, and she did a good job.
It's a great film. I've seen that, and I would implore people to check that out. Ruth, a side note again to that story, what was Eleanor Roosevelt like?
She was one of the best women I have known. And she asked me one day if I would take her to Israel and take her to see how they were settling newcomers. And I said it would be a great pleasure. So she came to Israel, and we stayed in the same hotel. And when I told some of the people in Israel that Eleanor Roosevelt wanted to see how they were treating newcomers, they gave us a car and a chauffeur, and we went into one of the developing towns. And we told them that I was bringing Eleanor there, and she came, and they took pictures of her holding little children. And the man in charge of developing towns, or one anyway, said, let's take Eleanor and show her how we're developing people and how we're treating them. And so we took her and she said she didn't want to go to a town they had prepared. So she crossed over and opened the door and went herself into a place. And there was a young mother holding a baby. And she saw Eleanor. She said, oh, I'm so ashamed. I have no place for you. I can't give you food. She said, forget all that. I want to know how you're being treated. And she asked all the same questions which she asked in America. And I realized her heart was almost as big as Eleanor. She wanted to be sure that they were being treated well in Israel. And she was very pleased with that. And then she asked me to take her to Beersheba, to the southernmost town. And there she talked about America to the mayor. And they had a very good talk. And Alan was listening. And he came up to her. And he had fallen in love with her. And he said, I'm going to marry you. And I'm going to give you 2 camels for your dowry. And Eleanor said, sorry, but I'm already married.
What a great story that is, and kind of really explains why people say that Eleanor Roosevelt was the first lady of the world.
Indeed, she really was.
Ruth, another part of history that you were a part of, that a sad part of history, is the Nuremberg trials. You sat in on those. What was that like?
Well, my brother Irving was in the war, and he sat. I found the war was already over, but the Nuremberg trials were going to get those horrible murderers. So Bartley Crumb, who was one of the leaders of the Annual American Committee of Inquiry on Palestine, which had been set up by our government, and we sat in the front row while they took testimony, and we looked up at these horrors, Goering, all of them. And I whispered to my brother, you know, I hate guns, but if I had a gun, I would shoot every one of them.
Ruth did... Oh, go ahead.
Well, they were, these horrible guys were treated so well. During his uniform was pressed every morning. And of course, all medals were stripped, but he sat there looking as if they had won the war. And they were, of course, mostly killed, but he carried his own poison and killed himself.
Ruth, did you buy their defense at the trials that they were just taking orders? As a journalist, do you believe that?
Did I believe
that the defense of most of these people who committed these horrible crimes, their defense all seemed to be that they were just taking orders from somebody higher up. Do you believe that?
Of course not. They didn't need to take orders. They were such horrible men. But they were given good treatments, better treatments than were given to refugees. But they pretended that they weren't guilty of any crimes. But they did not suffer that they managed to get, but they deserved whatever we gave them. Many of them were shot and killed.
Ruth, I would say, in certainly my opinion, the other big story and certainly moment in your life was Exodus 1947. I know you've talked about this a lot. A great documentary was made about it ahead of time. But for the purposes of this interview, what would you like to say about that to the people who maybe don't know exactly what it was?
Well, the people who had gotten out of the DP, displaced persons camps, came down from the camps into southern France and put on ships to take them to Palestine, because that was going to be the Jewish homeland. And they got on a ship called Exodus 1947. And it was one of the best stories, because they were in this ship, there were ships trying to get through the British blockade. Britain controlled Palestine in 1947, and on this ship they would try to break through the blockade and get into Palestine. And they were put into this ship. It had been a former American ship, and they slept on the floor, on anything they could sit, and then they got into Marseille, and from there to Palestine, and became people who got through British blockade and waited and were there when Palestine became Israel.
And certainly one of the most amazing photographs from that time, or a lot of the photographs, were taken by you, Ruth.
Yes.
Just tell that little story of
yes.
Yeah.
When they were sent three prison ships, three different ships from southern France up to northern, and there was the ship Exodus, and I got Runaway Park, it was called, and I got up, I was asked, when the word came that they were going to be sent to prison camps, I got up and British said they would be on these three ships, and the British consul announced, the British said, we're going to send three journalists on each of these three ships to get so they decided on the Runaway Park, where the British had the biggest group of Jewish refugees. And the British consul said, I will send one journalist for the French, for the entire French press, one journal for the English press, one journal for the American press. And he selected me to represent the entire American press. And when I got there, and I went up to the top level of the ship, the refugees came out with a big flag, and they had painted the swastika on the British Union Jack. And it was the most exciting thing I had seen. And it became the most famous picture I ever took. Life magazine made it the picture of the week and the life series of books on the wall, having to do a big double spread. And that's the most famous picture I think I ever took.
I think it's one of the most famous pictures of all time because of what it represented. It just is an amazing photo, Ruth. I just want to ask some summing up questions here. As a journalist, we're always told to not give our opinion. Now, Ruth, you're a woman with strong opinions. Was it hard to hide your opinion a lot of the time?
Was it hard to what?
Was it hard to hide your opinion as a journalist?
No, everybody knew what I believed in. But they also knew that I was always tell the truth. They knew that I never let my own personal beliefs affect my writing. I believe that we all have souls. We have to look into our souls and find our truths. My truths were to tell the truth, to write with my heart, and I believe I did that with all my articles. I wrote with my heart, and I let no obstacles stop me.
Very well put. Ruth, how do you define yourself, career-wise?
How would I define myself?
Yes.
As a journalist who wanted the world to know what it meant to tell the truth, to tell the things that you see and that you must always, always write with your heart. The best journalist around once said to me, Ruth, take pictures with your heart. And I think that's what I followed. With every picture I took, I followed what he had told me. I took pictures with my heart, and I let no obstacles stop me.
Ruth, as we sit today, you don't look it, but you're 101 years old. What does that feel like to be 101? Most of us will not make that age.
It doesn't look any better than when you're 20 or 99. You are what you are. And again, I say, work with your heart. Write stories with your heart. Tell what you have to tell and do it with your heart.
Is there any secret to getting to be 101 years old?
I don't think it's a secret. I think it's living the life that we all must live. Living it with honesty, integrity, and a love for human beings.
What is life like at 101, Ruth? Are you still able to do the things you want to do?
You try. You don't always succeed. But you try to do the best you can. And you never let yourself down. You keep going.
When you look back at the more than a century you have lived, what do you consider the highlight?
I think the highlight was bringing those 1,000 refugees to America.
Do you have any regrets?
Oh, I could have done a lot more. I wish I had. But I keep on doing, so that's the thing. Never stop.
Is there something in your mind that you say you wish you had done more of? Is it writing? Is it reporting? What do you wish you had done more of?
Well, I wish I had done more books. I did 19, but I think I could have done some more.
At this time, is there anything you still want to do?
I want to be able to keep on telling people that we must live without hatred. We must live a life of honesty, integrity, and our arms around the ones we love.
Very well put. Ruth, I have 2 questions here from people who knew I was going to be interviewing you, and I want to get these in. The first one is, what was your impression of Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess?
That they were hideous. They were horrors. They needed the kind of ending that many of them got, where our government found them guilty.
And this next question, Ruth, comes from a viewer, and I can think of nobody better to ask this question of than you. What advice do you have for women on being strong? What advice would you give to a woman?
I would say, again, work with your heart. Find that thing that means most to you and do it with your whole heart. Hold your children close to you. They're your most precious possession.
Ruth, it's in the news all the time. It's been in the news for years. Are we ever going to see an end to the Palestinian and Israel fighting?
I think we will. When I heard that Ben Gurion, who was the father of Israel, the founder, the Moses, the George Washington, the best leader of any that I've met, when I heard he was dying, I went to see him. And he was living all alone. His wife, Paula, a former American nurse, had died. We had buried her in the Negev, where he had a summer home. And I went to see him, and I said, Master, will there ever be peace between the Arabs and Jews? And he said, yes, there will be peace. And I said, where will it be? Where will it come from? He said, Egypt. I said, Egypt? How can you say Egypt? This was true. He said, they come, I said, they send their Jeraim into Egypt. They shoot to our children's homes. He threw his arm right. When he didn't agree with you, go this way. He said, forget all that. We will get along very well. We have things they don't. We will help them keep their babies alive. They have about 750 babies born a year, and a good too many die. We will help them learn about medicine. Our doctors, our scientists will go and teach them how to keep a better life. They have things we need. They have medicines, they have things growing in their grass. We will have peace. Well, he went all that way. I saw he was getting tired. I said, Master, finally, will there be peace? And he said, yes. I said, when will it come? He said, not in my time, not in your time, maybe in your children's time, but there will be peace.
I certainly hope he was right. I certainly hope he was right. Ruth, before we get out, I just want to ask you one current event, because I haven't heard you talk about this. In 2008, here in the United States, you're an American. President Obama elected, certainly a watershed moment for this country as far as electing an African-American president. What are your feelings on Obama and how he's been treated in his first 4 years?
I think he's going to become one of the famous presidents. I think he has known real tragedies, and he has known how to fight. And I think he was both a scholar and a fighter. And I think with those qualities, he's going to make a big difference.
I have to ask this one question, Ruth, along those lines. You've seen a lot of prejudice in your life enacted by other people. What do you make of the birth certificate stuff with Obama that is still floating around out there 5 years into his presidency?
I don't pay much attention to it. I think he has the right ideas. It may take a little more time, but he's going to get us there.
And the final question, Ruth, and I don't think you'll be leaving us anytime soon. I think you're going to be around a long while. But 50 years, 100 years from now, when people look back on your life, how do you want them to remember you?
Say it again.
How would you like people to remember you?
How would I like to be
Looked back on?
Just that I was a person who worked with a heart and who hoped that someday there would be peace and harmony in the world.
Well, Ruth, I have to say that I certainly thank you for giving me the time to do this interview, and it truly is a thrill for me. Number one, because we're in the same profession, but because you, I believe, set such a high watermark for what a journalist should be. You didn't become part of the story, but you helped other people tell their stories that maybe would not have gotten told. And it's an honor to speak with you. You're looking great. I hope you come back with us in the future, and I want you to stay well.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Dr. Ruth Gruber, the legendary Dr. Ruth Gruber, author, photographer, journalist, legend. Thank you so much. I certainly hope you've enjoyed our chat with Dr. Ruth Gruber. Dr. Gruber certainly has a genuine opinion and experience of everything that is going on in what we call the 20th century, something people have called the People's Century. Before we get out of here today, we're going to do a new segment. It's how to get some free money with Mr. Question Mark himself, Matthew Lesko. Take it away, Matt.
Sure, numbers can be scary, but they also can be very helpful. They can point you to the future. They can point you, to see focus your mind on what you really should be worrying about. I mean, our gut tells us really what to do a lot of times in life, but sometimes it's hard to get the big picture, of what's really going on everywhere, because we're all pretty parochial in what we're doing with and who we know and what's going on, and that influences us sometimes a little too much. So take a look at these stats here. Suicide statistics just came out from the Center for Disease Control. Okay, look at that. There's more suicides in this country now than car deaths. Right. So suicides this year, 36,909 suicides this year. And auto deaths, only 30,000. Look, we've done something with auto. I remember we used to be 50,000. I was driving a lot less miles and things like that. So now we're at 36,000 suicides, but we have laws for people to ride, have seatbelts, right? But nobody wants to put in laws to lock up a gun, do we? People killing themselves. So maybe we want to save lives. We should think about, suicides more than automobiles. Here's another interesting fact in the suicide data. More men, but not only more men, like almost 3-4 times as many men than women commit suicides. It's 27 out of 100,000 men commit suicide versus only 8 for women. I always thought women had an edge on what life is all about and figured this out, or maybe because they have babies or whatever, but they have a better sense of what life is, I think, than us stupid guys. Here's another interesting thing. Now suicide rate is going up so high in this country. There's something going on, right? If suicide is increasing, and look at this data. From 1999 to 2010, okay, so that's about 10 years, suicide went from 8th on the list of leading cause of death for men, people of middle age, to 4th. So suicide is now the 4th cause of death for middle-aged people. 4th. Wow, it used to be 8th just 10 years ago. So it went from 8th to 4th. So something's really happening. I mean, people aren't comfortable or something. I mean, there's a lot of worry. We have to take this, it sounds like, a little more seriously than we have in the past. So that's interesting data to me. Okay, look at this about the middle class. What's happening to the middle class? Okay, 59% of Americans are worried they will fall out of the middle class. So that's over half. Half the people who are in the middle class now feel that they're not going to be middle class anymore. They're not going up, they're going to be going down. So that's obviously a function of how people feel optimistic, right? So they don't feel that they're going to grow in this country anymore, that they're going to go backwards. And that's really happened to a lot of people, unfortunately. Here, 80% believe more have fallen out of the middle class than have moved into it in the past few years. So this is the recession going on. So, I mean, that's a lot, but 80% believe that there's more people falling out of the middle class and down into poverty than those who went the other way. Okay, who's responsible for making it worse for the middle class? Okay, here are the people that the survey found that are blamed for people not making it in the middle class anymore. Number 1, Congress. Those guys haven't done anything in a long time, have they? The CEOs of major corporations. Okay, that's the capitalist system, right? And guess who else? Big financial institutions. Yeah, I don't know. I think we found maybe the limits of capitalism. Capitalism is awfully good. I love using it and things like that. But maybe not for everything, right? And that should maybe be discussed a little more. Because, look, you have everybody blaming those 3 factors for why people are leaving the middle class. And 85% of the middle class believe it's more difficult now than a decade ago to maintain their standard of living. So they believe now it's harder to just stay even than ever before. I know, I mean, I keep looking at data, that show like a 30-year-old guy now makes, like 20-30% less than when I was 30 years old. That's just average. So we're not doing too well in creating opportunities and growth in this country. And there's a lot of reasons for it, but we should start making changes, I would think. At least something. We got to do something. Just not pretend it's going to go away and everything's okay. We should just get more of the same thing. I mean, that's silly. If you're playing a losing hand, man, you just don't keep playing it. You got to change the game. At least you don't know if it's right, but you know what you're doing now ain't right. So that's the only thing you have to know, is that what you're doing now is not right. You don't have to be positive about what is right. You take your best shot, your best guess, and see what happens.
Matthew Lesko, always interesting, always entertaining, always out to help you, the consumer. I hope you enjoyed that segment, and we'll have more segments in the weeks and months to come here on Scott Spears Now. But for now, it's time to wrap up this episode by saying, this is Scott Spears, headed for the dugout.